it's Wacky Anime Lift here to present you with What If Deku Was Never Human to Begin With, Part 1. Let's go ahead and get into it. Currently, Izuku is walking towards UA. As he walks towards it for the entrance exam, he looks at it and says, looks very, very fancy, he says in his head, before walking directly through the front gates, going directly into the auditorium for the written exam. As soon as he gets in there, he goes towards the desk, sits down, and waits for his paper to be handed, before looking at all the people literally coming in, and sees one person who he really wishes he would not have seen. He sees Katsuki is what Izuku narrates, before thinking, I really, really didn't want to see him here. Let's just hope he doesn't recognize me, as he puts his head downwards, hoping he doesn't get recognized, as Katsuki tries to find a seat, noticing that everyone else already took their seats, and there was only one seat left, and it was next to the guy with his head down. Walks towards him, sits down right beside him, and Izuku just says in his head, he had to sit here. Fuck my life. And it's as if his answers were literally heard. As if his prayers were heard to fuck his life. All of a sudden, President Mike walks in, has a ton of tests in his hand, and starts passing them out before getting up to where Izuku is and says, here you go. Izuku lifts his head up for a moment just to grab the paper, and right when he did, all of a sudden, Katsuki saw him and immediately said, Deku, is that you? And Izuku just looks at him with a harsh glare and said, Katsuki, sorry I mispronounced your name. If you don't shut the fuck up, I will make you, so help me, I will make you cry yourself to sleep every night, like how I did. And immediately this shut up Bakugo, as he just had a hateful glare towards Izuku. But he immediately shut up because he saw an intense aura around Izuku. Not to mention, he saw President Mike looking at him questionably. President Mike continued passing them all out, but also put a mental note about to check on those two, if they ever made it into UA or if they didn't, because definitely had some mental problems. Immediately, as Izuku looks at his paper, he finished it in over 10 seconds, because as soon as President Mike was about to sit down, Izuku walked up towards him with his paper, and all of a sudden, President Mike says, did you not have a pen with you, or do you need a pen? I mean, I could give you one. He pulls out a pen, and it's an All Might pen, and Izuku immediately sees the All Might pen and just has a face of disgust, and says, no, and I would not touch that pen if it was the last pen to exist, or if it would save humanity. I would not touch that pen. I would probably chop off my hand if I did, so please keep that away from me. And he just literally covers his eyes and looks away from it, as if that pen is the plague itself. And Brother Mike is quite literally appalled, because most people actually like All Might. So he puts his pen away, and immediately says, okay, then what are you here for? Izuku says, oh yeah, I finished my test. He hands him the test. President Mike looks through the test instantly, not believing him at all, having eyes of doubt towards Izuku. As he looks through the test, he's quite literally shocked. His eyes are completely widened, as he sees that he didn't only just get all of them correct, he corrected some of the actual answers to certain questions. He corrected some of the multiple choice questions, actually. He also corrected certain different ideologies of who said this ideology and who didn't. And this was quite impressive, and it made President Mike actually go pale, because he realized whoever actually completed all this and was almost 100% correct, or 100% correct, would be Nezu's new student, and now he's imagining two Nezus walking around. The world does not need this, he says this in his head, before putting away the actual papers and shakily saying, the physical is right next door, you can go ahead and go. They'll probably be finished in a few hours. And Izuku makes it towards the next door area, before President Mike proceeds to literally ask a certain pro hero and says, can you watch over them to make sure they don't cheat? I had a phone call to do. As he walks out and immediately pulls out his flip phone and calls certain, let's just say, coffee addict. POV change to the coffee addict. Currently, Aizawa is in Nezu's office. They're talking about certain things. Aizawa's talking about how the physical part of the UA entrance exam is completely rigged for people that don't have flashy quirks. And Nezu's saying, well, that is true, but we can't really change it after all. We tried to go through the Hero Council and they wouldn't let us. I even tried to blackmail them, and they were quite persistent with this. And they said that this year we would keep this, but next year it would change. And Aizawa was quite literally smiling for a little bit because he knows next year is going to change to where less flashy, egotistic little brats get into his classroom. Before he immediately hears his phone ring and looks towards Nezu, and Nezu immediately just says, okay, are you going to answer that? And he says, oh, okay. And Nezu, as if his instincts were just kicking in high gear, he thinks, I must be having a student. I must have my own student now. After all, my Nezu senses are tingling. His rat god senses were just tingling, saying he was going to have his own student. All of a sudden, he says, also, it's probably to tale about my new student. As he flips through cameras trying to find out where his new student will be, his rat senses never, ever failed him, and immediately goes into the physical portion of the UA entrance exam to the waiting room and sees Izuku just there, sitting there. As Aizawa just pulls out his phone, answers the phone, and immediately President Mike says, Aizawa, I have some bad news, and let me just tell you, the bad news is not good at all. And Aizawa says, I've heard worse. Go ahead and shoot. And President Mike just gulps and says, there might be a Nezu 2.0. Aizawa's eyes just go completely deadpan and lifeless. And this man just stares towards Nezu, stares towards the screen of Nezu 2.0 essentially, and just screams out, no, so loud that it startled everyone that was taking the written portion of the test. It startled the people who had hearing quirks so bad they had to go to Recovery Girl, and it made all the birds leave and migrate to a different portion of Japan. It was that bad because they thought a wild predator was on the loose. And the worst part about all of this is the fact everyone in Japan heard it, and it was labeled one of the top 10 mysteries of Japan about where that scream came from. It was that bad. And Nezu was just looking at him, and as he finishes, Nezu says, are you done? And Aizawa just looks at him, puts up a finger, and says, hold on a little bit, before he leaves the room, walks all the way towards the restroom, with a paper bag in hand, and screams into the bag so loud that it actually pops the bag from all the air that was in it. And then he walks back directly into the room and says, now I'm done. As Nezu says, oh, okay. So, aside from that, I'm going to go ahead and look up about my new students, as he's already dead set on literally picking him as his new student because he already heard about what he did. He looks through the records of the people that are applying, and he sees one record that's labeled as Izuku, and it has no last name. He immediately thinks, wait, Izuku, where have I heard that from? Then he remembers, oh, that's All Might's missing son. All Might and Inko's missing son. Well, I have some good news to tell them, as he is about to get out his phone before he realizes, wait a minute. And then he realizes he never really heard about him until he was missing. So he thinks that something might be wrong. He decides not to call them here. After all, they'll be here anyway. So he immediately just puts away his phone and looks through what his quirk is. See, his quirk is labeled as demonic energy, which allows him to do a multitude of things, which catches his attention quite a lot since he's supposedly quirkless. And this makes him quite intrigued. He starts to laugh, and when he starts to laugh, let me just tell you, it creeps out Aizawa so much. He starts to try to leave the room, but then realizes the door is locked, and sees someone at the other end holding the door and says, "I'm sorry, Aizawa, but you have to stay in there for the greater good. We can't let that laugh ring out through the entire school and then scare the kids away." And Aizawa was just like, "Let me out!" as he's banging on the door. Nezu's laughing even more intensely, then pulls out an entire gallon of tea and starts chugging the tea while laughing. And the tea's just spilling everywhere. As Aizawa just sees him drinking an entire gallon of tea, and then all of a sudden, he finishes the tea. He gets up and starts T-posing and going towards Aizawa while T-posing and laughing. And Aizawa says, "No, help me." POV change. Currently, Izuku has a feeling that someone's literally in the most hilarious circumstance, but he can't see it. So immediately he thinks, maybe I should go visit Fred. Yeah, I'll go visit Fred. After all, knowing him, he's probably very hungry. He snaps his fingers, and POV change. Currently, Nezu just looked towards the screen after traumatizing Aizawa so bad that he's in the corner crying to himself while wrapping himself around his own capture scarf. Immediately, he stares directly at the screen and just saw Izuku snap his fingers and just disappears from existence. He just popped out of existence, causing Nezu to literally have a glint in his eye, and is very curious about that. Goes right towards his desk and tries to hack into different security cameras to find out where he went. Like, he's just hacking, trying to find out where he went. POV change. Currently, Izuku just pops into a cabin in the woods, directly in front of it, walks through, opens the door, walks through, closes it behind him, and immediately goes towards the living room of the cabin, before pulling out a few ingredients from the fridge and making some lunch for himself and for Fred, which you're about to find out who Fred is, as he makes 2 plates, puts one at the other end of the table and one towards his end. He sits down, immediately screams out, "Hey Fred, there's food. Also, please don't break the door." Before he can even finish, all of a sudden, you see a door that's right next to the living room, which is where Fred literally stays at, just immediately bust open as Fred just walks through the door and says, "Food," before walking towards the table, pulling up his chair and sitting down. As he sits down, he looks towards his food and he says, literally, Izuku sighs and says, "I'm gonna have to fix that door, aren't I?" he says in his head, before hearing a yes in his head. Immediately, he looks towards Fred and says, "Alright, but at least please eat your food like a normal person, please, Fred." And Fred just looks at him, looks towards the food, and Izuku knows that look. And he says, "Fred, no." And Fred looks at him, looks back to the food, and then he says, "Fred, don't do it." And Fred just looks at him and says, "Fred, yes." And then slams his head directly into the food. And he starts eating the food while he's face planted into it. And Izuku just says, "I don't even know why I bother." You know, when I summoned a familiar, I was expecting for my familiar to be have a little bit more, and immediately Fred just lifted his head out of the food. You could see literally grits all over his face, with eggs on his eyes, and bacon literally on his mouth. That literally shows a whole smiley face. And then he just eats the bacon and says, "More brains?" And Izuku says, "You know, I was not going to say that. I was going to say more charisma, but that too, I guess." And immediately, Fred just looks at him and says, "Where you go?" And Izuku says, "I went to UA. I was, doing the entrance exam. I still am. I just came here to fix you some food and to tell you, please don't go back into the city. Please don't. Last time you had everyone convinced that a zombie apocalypse was going to happen. Specifically, a certain certain guy with like yellow hair and a lightning bolt. Well, you ended up walking into the city. I don't know how you met this guy, but you were trying to become friends with him, apparently, which I respect. I mean, everyone needs a friend," as he pats him on the shoulder. But he says, I don't respect the fact that you made him think that a zombie apocalypse is going to happen, as you were shaking his hand, and your hand fell directly out. Your hand fell off. And he saw this, looked at you, and glanced you over a little bit when your actual little face mask fell off, and then he screamed out zombie and started screaming out the apocalypse is coming, everyone run, and I had to teleport towards your location and knock him out and erase his memory. Yeah, I don't want that happening again. Please don't. And Fred just looks at him and says, no promises. And Izuku says, of course, no promises. Okay, I'll be back in like maybe 5 p.m.-ish, I hope, before snapping his fingers, literally popping back out of existence. POV change. Currently, present Mike is explaining the entire, about all the robots. Specifically, he's about to go towards the zero pointer until all of a sudden, Katsuki Bakugo, who is right beside an empty seat, looks beside him and sees Izuku, glances beside him to see Izuku just pop into existence right into the chair, scaring Bakugo so bad he falls out of his chair and just starts screaming, what the fuck just happened? And Izuku just says, Bakugo, you're disturbing everyone, can't you see? And then Bakugo says, I think you disturb everyone, you just popped into existence. Before Ida says, hey, you didn't go over the zero pointer. And immediately he says, if this is what UA has to say and leaves everyone so misinformed, then this doesn't deserve to be such a highly rated hero school. And then he looks behind him and says, and you, before he points towards Izuku and towards Bakugo. He points towards Bakugo and says, you, why are you so loud? And then he points towards Izuku and says, and you, why did you just pop into existence? You know that quirk usage is illegal. And also, you do know that this is a hero school, not here for villains. As Izuku looks towards him and says, okay, first off, why did you say that I was a villain? Second off, I was warming up my quirk, and I had to go somewhere because it was an emergency, just so you know. And immediately, Ida says, of course you're a villain. I mean, look at your pure red eyes. And the fact you just teleported in here out of nowhere, unannounced, and most likely, you didn't even do the first test. While he also said, and I didn't see you in the first test. As Izuku says, it's because I finished first, I also aced it, and I had much better things to do than be there with a pompous ass like you in that room. So why don't you sit the fuck down before that stick that's all the way up your ass gets shoved further up your ass to make it go all the way through you to where it pops out of your goddamn mouth. Immediately, he says this in a demonic ass voice, which scares the fuck out of Ida. He just sits down, just completely shivering, as Izuku lets a dark aura go around the entire area, causing everyone to shiver, even President Mike. And he immediately lets go of the aura after a few minutes and says, alright, so anyone else have anything to say? And everyone just quickly shakes their head no, like in a fast pace to where they were shaking their heads no so fast that it outpaced how fast Ida runs. Immediately, President Mike says, alright, so the zero pointer you're supposed to avoid. Now, let's go ahead and get into it. Now, everyone's going to be split up into different districts and different cities for the test. And Izuku immediately got Test District A, or Test City A. Immediately, he gets on a bus and goes towards the test city. As soon as they reach it, they're about to go ahead and start. But as they're about to start, the test, and the gates are about to open, all of a sudden, I decide to stop this. What if right here? I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, make sure you smash that like button. I hope this wasn't too bad or too cringy. I did try my best, but honestly, I've been kind of going through mainly a burnt out phase, honestly. It's quite hard to make good content these days. But anyway, thank you all for watching.